Hi everyone, my name's Christian Mercer, and I'm going to read a short story to promote my novel, The Reincarnation Wars, a tale of reincarnation and the end of the world. The story I'm going to read to you is a trailer to whet your literary appetites. It features my villain and his descent into ruthlessness, and it's called Conspiracy. Rome, 2013. The coming of Mesagmin will literally kill billions. We have 11 years, gentlemen. 11 years to save mankind. The words of the senator echoed in his head, even now, months after the secret meeting. Dr. Erasmus Luke, PhD and OBE, was reflecting on this terrifying news even as he met his driver at the airport, even as he was led to his waiting car. There was so much to do. In Vatican City, every flag was at half-mast. As the car pulled to a stop, Dr. Luke noticed two cardinals in deep conversation. He fancied he knew what they were probably thinking. These two Lord Protectors of the Church veritably radiated disapproval. They wore expressions that said they thought what had transpired simply wasn't on. Snorting, he decided one could only commiserate so much. Oh, such silly, deluded people. If they thought things were strange now, then how would they fare in 11 years' time, when it all really would hit the proverbial fan? Waiting outside Frank's plush office, Dr. Luke grimaced. He didn't feel as sanguine about Frank's fate as either the shareholders or the senators did. True, I'm no longer as upstanding as I used to be, he admitted to himself. Ever since Kurdistan, he'd been involved in one or two murky operations, and would probably have initiated one or two himself, if Gwilym hadn't been such an obstinate stick in the mud. The memory of how he tried to persuade Gwilym to relocate the local Kurds now made him smile. At least such mischief had only ever involved strangers. He glanced at a fresco of the Last Supper on the wall before him. He'd never been a Judas before. Palaces, frescoes, Praetorians with halberds. He'd only been in Rome an hour, and already he'd seen unequivocal displays of the Church's power. The attainment of power for power's sake, not something he'd ever approved of. And yet here he was, chasing the very same objective. No, he reminded himself, his ends more than justified the means. He needed to do this, to keep his position, a status quo that had to be maintained if he was ever to find Gold Eyes. Thinking of the compassion she'd shown him, he owed it to her. But did that justify harming a friend? Was he any better than Judas or even the Church, acquiring power for the sake of it? Pushing back such scruples, he looked up at the gargoyles on the ceiling. He'd have to proceed exceedingly carefully. After all, he thought, gazing out of the window, it would be so easy to confirm something inadvertently, simply by asking Frank if he'd spoken of it. That wouldn't do at all. As he noticed the way a ring of buildings enclosed a smaller ring of fountains within the central plaza, Dr. Luke could see just how similar his surroundings were to the circumstances in which he found himself. He knew the whole scene before him was closed from public access. Mesagmin was like the marble statue at the very center of that plaza, a secret within a secret. In the decades since the strange thing had been found in the mountains, he had seen a few people who worked on the project become devout believers in God. The wonders they were privy to sometimes did that, just as seeing the Earth from orbit had endowed many astronauts with a sense of the divine. But Frank had gone before he'd had a chance to learn the darker side of the business. He'd never been told about 2024, about Mesagmin. Frank shouldn't be leaking that information, because it wasn't supposed to be something he had. No, it had been agreed upon. If Frank had already passed on something they'd only told the board about last month, that meant he wasn't the only traitor in the ranks. When the door before him opened, Dr. Luke's reverie was broken by the sight of a figure in a black cassock, haloed by light. He really hadn't changed much, except his shoulders seemed a trifle rigid, and there was something odd about his smile. It was, well, not quite insincere, just too well rehearsed. "Father," said Dr. Luke, rising from his seat, "it's so nice to see you after all this time." "Frank, please." Frank's grin faltered. "It has been a while." 9 years! Dr. Luke stepped into the office. "And you've come far. Scientific advisor to His Holiness." He let the comment hang, relishing how hollow Frank's title suddenly sounded. This was the moment, he decided. It was now or never. "I'm glad to see I still have your admiration, Frank, and your loyalty." Frank winced at that, just as Dr. Luke had thought he would. "Baraka Industries always valued you for such qualities. The company requires nothing but the utmost discretion. It's an important part of why you were chosen, you know." Frank squirmed. "Yes, I thought that's what was needed. That's why we made everyone sign those rather tedious confidentiality agreements." Dr. Luke continued, tapping his nose. "Legally binding, naturally. Why, otherwise, ex-employees could say whatever they liked to whomever they chose, whenever the fancy took them." Frank raised his hands. All right, I can see why you came here now." "Popes never resign," said Dr. Luke. "Yet this one does. And only a month after you become his advisor. You will agree, it is only natural, we would assume." "You can see I told him about other universes," finished Frank. "About the future." "The future?" Dr. Luke was surprised. "I saw you tap enough energy to turn lead into gold," breathed Frank. "And all with energy from another universe." He swallowed and looked Dr. Luke in the eye. "Or from the future." Dr. Luke thought this over for a moment. Of course, Frank had left the research after 2 years, long before it had become certain they couldn't connect 2 points across time. "And that is what you told the revered Pope Benedict." "So much of what we knew about the world had to be rethought," Frank said. "It was like the day Galileo said the earth moved round the sun." "Well, I do suppose the church would have reparations to make, to Nostradamus and such. Suddenly every prophet will have to have a share. It's only fair." "It was more the thought of the future being fixed that jolted him," Frank explained. "Man is no longer the author of his actions. Everything is fixed, predetermined. The Holy Father didn't feel he was the man to deal with this, and he didn't feel ready to tell his cardinals. He had to step down." "You didn't tell anyone else, and you unseated the Pope with an idea that isn't even proven." Dr. Luke wanted to laugh. "Quite the stir you caused," he admitted. "Do you have anything else to point out? If Frank could be persuaded not to tell his equals, this could be resolved very simply." Frank looked aghast. "Do you realize the magnitude of the secrets you're keeping? The people have a right to know." Frank's shoulders seemed to relax slightly. "No, I didn't tell him about the company's latest secret product, or any shady dealings it's made. Your industrial secrets are safe with me. Besides, compared to linking to the future, what could possibly compare?" "Why, Mesagmin, of course," thought Dr. Luke. That would. This was perfect. The elephant was loose now, and it had shown Frank knew nothing of the coming apocalypse. "What I learnt in those labs," Frank continued, "showed me not only that reality is filled with unbelievable wonders, it also taught me that we have physical proof of something from the Old Testament." Dr. Luke inhaled. That didn't sound good. Maybe Frank did know something he shouldn't after all. "And what, pray, is that proof you wish the world to know?" "Here," said Frank, reaching for a Bible. "This Bible is illustrated, but its beauty holds no candle to reality." Dr. Luke wanted to burst out laughing with relief. The page Frank showed him depicted a tree, a snake, and a naked man and woman. "I thought this was a myth," Frank continued, "a metaphor. But you found evidence of it in Kurdistan. The people need to know it's real. Dr. Luke raised an eyebrow. Well now, this was interesting. Frank was talking of the fruit. Again, not something that hadn't been postulated in late-night work sessions. Any other parts of the Bible you wish to prove? Frank would certainly have to be silenced. He'd blabbed about the very thing that had led to Masagmin's discovery. At least, though, he only knew things on Genesis, not Revelations, not about Masagmin itself. And if the only other person he told was a retiring pope, no. Well then, absolutely no harm done. Dr. Luke noticed the way Frank was staring into space. If you're concerned about what the people should know, come to Washington next month. Maybe Frank didn't know about Masagmin, but he'd spoken of things connected with its discovery. He'd have to be silenced. You'll come out with everything? Suddenly Frank's eyes were full of hope. Just to the world leaders? Dr. Luke recalled what he had been told. Next month, a confidential meeting would inform every nation, so they could plan an escape without the people's knowledge. But I'm a priest. You're a papal advisor, and until a new pope is elected, you're the best person to attend. The pope is, after all, a world leader, is he not? Frank nodded. Dr. Luke remembered what the senator had told him. The FBI and the CIA would deal with anyone he referred to them. That was guaranteed. Now it was decision time. Did he leave this room honor intact, but his chance to save Goldeyes compromised, or did he play Brutus? He imagined Goldeyes innocently going about her business on the day Masagmin arrived, her life snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Provided, of course, she had the good fortune to die immediately. He wasn't going to let that happen, if he could help it. Principles and honor were all very well, but this was a tough scenario. He took a deep breath. We'll reserve your flight, and when you return, you can tell your colleagues here. It was done. The die was cast. Legitimately. Thank you. Frank's body sagged with relief. Thank you. It'll be good to have you back on American soil again. Dr. Luke beamed. Back where we can control you. For one final time, he regretted having to do this to a fellow such as Frank. Then he felt the relief that came with a hard decision made. That was just too bad. Frank Ballywell deserved to be in hot water. Thank you, said Frank. It'll be good to be back. I'll be able to tell my fellow priests all I know. Dr. Luke suppressed a sigh. There'd be no messages from Frank after he left here, but that was simply tough luck. No correspondence would be allowed from those who revealed the secret, those who were going to Guantanamo Bay. So, the ballad of Dr. Luke continues in my novel, The Reincarnation Wars, and I'll be putting up other short stories very soon. If you want to hear more, subscribe, and I'll read them onto YouTube when I can. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good weekend.